He thought she was a prostitute, so he slept with her, but she was his daughter-in-law, and she was setting a trap, not for revenge, but for justice. In a world where women were property and where widows were forgotten, one woman refused to disappear into the shadows of history. She would not be erased. She would not be silenced. Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe button. Her name was Tamar, and what she did next would shock an entire kingdom, challenge an ancient family's honor, and ultimately change the course of human history. This is the story of how God chose the one woman everyone else rejected. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the fields of Canaan. Judah wiped sweat from his brow as he examined the young woman standing before him. "Your father speaks highly of you, Tamar," he said, circling her like a merchant inspecting goods at market. "You will make a fine wife for my son." Tamar kept her eyes downcast as was proper, but inside, her heart pounded against her ribs like a caged bird. She had known this day would come. All girls did. Marriage wasn't about love. It was about alliances, bloodlines, and survival. "She's strong," her father said proudly. "She'll bear many sons." Judah nodded with satisfaction. As the fourth son of Jacob, he had built his own household away from his father and brothers. After that terrible business with Joseph years ago, the brother they had sold into slavery and told their father was dead, Judah couldn't bear to stay. The guilt ate at him daily. But here, in his own territory, with his 3 growing sons, he was building something new. "It's settled then," Judah declared. "She will marry my firstborn." And just like that, Tamar's fate was sealed. No one asked what she wanted. No one cared. She was simply a vessel, a means to continue the family line. The wedding happened quickly. Within a week, Tamar found herself in a stranger's home, married to a stranger's son. Was handsome enough, tall like his father, with dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. But those eyes held something else too, something cold that made Tamar shiver whenever he looked at her. "You're mine now," told her on their wedding night, his fingers digging painfully into her arm. "Don't ever forget that." He was cruel in ways Tamar had never imagined a husband could be. He took pleasure in her fear, delighted in her pain. When they were alone, he became a different person than the charming son Judah thought he had raised. Months passed, then a year. Tamar's belly remained flat, her womb empty. "What's wrong with you?" would demand, his voice slurred with wine. "One job. You have one job." But Tamar knew the truth. Had no interest in giving her a child. He took deliberate steps to prevent it, finding his pleasure but ensuring no seed would take root. It was his private joke, appearing to fulfill his duty while secretly denying his father the grandchildren he craved. What didn't understand was that God was watching, and God saw everything. The morning they found cold body, no one was more surprised than Tamar. One moment he was alive, angry and cruel as always, and the next he simply wasn't. The household erupted in chaos. Servants whispered that the gods had punished him. Judah tore his clothes in grief, his howls of anguish echoing through the compound. Tamar stood silently in the corner, her face appropriately sorrowful, but in her heart she felt only relief, and then immediately fear. What would happen to her now? She didn't have to wonder long. "You will marry Onan," Judah announced 3 days after funeral. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse from mourning. "It is our way. He will give you a son to carry on name." Tamar nodded obediently. This was indeed their custom, the law of levirate marriage. When a man died without children, his brother would marry the widow and their firstborn son would legally belong to the dead brother, ensuring his name and inheritance continued. Onan was different from Where had been openly cruel, Onan was pleasant enough in public. He smiled more. He didn't grip her arm until it bruised. For a brief moment, Tamar allowed herself to hope. That hope died on their wedding night. "I know what you want," Onan whispered as they lay together, "but I won't give it to you." Tamar looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "A baby," he said flatly. "If you have a son, he gets inheritance. Not me. I become the father of my brother's heir while getting nothing for myself." Understanding dawned on Tamar's face, followed quickly by despair. "Please," she whispered, "it is the law. It is what your father—" "I don't care what my father wants," Onan snapped. "I'll do what's required in his sight, but no child of mine will carry my brother's name." And so began another nightmare for Tamar. Onan would come to her bed, but each time he would spill his seed on the ground. He made sure Judah saw him fulfilling his brotherly duty, but privately he mocked both the custom and Tamar herself. Month after month passed without conception. Judah began giving Tamar concerned looks. Whispers spread through the household that perhaps she was barren, cursed even. No one suspected Onan's deception. No one except God. Less than a year after their marriage, Onan too was found dead in his bed. Once again the household was thrown into mourning. Once again Tamar stood silently as they prepared another husband for burial. This time the whispers were louder. 2 husbands, dead, and no children. People began to look at Tamar differently, keeping their distance as if death clung to her robes. Judah was devastated. 2 sons gone in less than 2 years, and as he watched Tamar standing silently at the funeral, a terrible thought took root in his mind. What if she was the cause? What if there was something about this woman that brought death to his sons? He still had 1 son left. Shelah was his youngest, barely a man. Judah couldn't bear the thought of losing him too. That night he called Tamar to him. "Listen carefully," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Shelah is still too young to marry. Return to your father's house and live as a widow until Shelah is of age. Then you will become his wife." Tamar searched Judah's face. She saw fear there and deception, but what choice did she have? "As you wish, my father," she said quietly, bowing her head. "I will wait for Shelah." As she packed her meager belongings, Tamar knew in her heart that Judah had no intention of ever giving her his last son. She was being sent away to be forgotten. The years passed slowly in her father's house. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tamar watched as other women her age nursed babies at their breasts, as their toddlers clung to their legs, as their children grew and played in the dusty streets. She watched and she waited. A widow's clothes, her daily reminder of what she had lost and what had been denied her. Shelah had grown into a man. Tamar heard this from traders who passed through the village. They said he was strong like his father, handsome like his brothers. They said he had taken a job managing his father's flocks. They said nothing about him coming for her. 5 years, 6, 7. Tamar's youth was slipping away, along with her chances of ever having a child. In their world, a woman without sons had no future, no security. When her father died, who would care for her? She would be at the mercy of distant relatives who might take her in out of duty, but would see her as nothing but a burden. And there was something else, something deeper that ached inside her. She had been promised to Judah's family. By law and custom, she was still bound to them. It was their duty to provide her with a child. To deny her this was to deny her very existence. As the 7th year of her exile drew to a close, Tamar made a decision. She would no longer wait for justice to find her. She would seek it herself. Her chance came with unexpected news. Judah's wife had died. After the customary period of mourning, he would be traveling to Timnah for the sheep shearing, a time typically marked by celebration and, often indulgence. Tamar knew what she had to do. The road to Timnah was dusty and well-traveled. Merchants, farmers, and tradespeople all used this route, particularly during festival times. It was the perfect place for someone who didn't want to be recognized. Tamar had planned carefully. She removed her widow's garments, the clothes that had marked her status for 7 long years, and hid them beneath a rock outside the village. In their place, she put on colorful robes and covered her face with a veil, not as a mark of mourning, but as the disguise of a sacred prostitute. Such women were common near the roads to pagan temples and festival sites. They served the goddess Ashtoreth, and men often visited them as part of fertility rituals. Their faces were always veiled, their identities hidden. Tamar's heart hammered in her chest as she took her position near the city gates. What she was doing carried enormous risk. If she were discovered, she would almost certainly be executed. But desperation had driven her beyond fear. She didn't have to wait long. As the sun reached its peak, she saw a small group of men approaching. Even at a distance, she recognized Judah's distinctive walk, the set of his shoulders. Age had bent him somewhat. Grief had whitened his beard, but there was no mistaking the man who had twice made her a widow and then abandoned her. Tamar pulled her veil closer and positioned herself where he would surely see her. Judah noticed her as he passed. He slowed, then stopped, telling his companions to continue without him. He would catch up later, he said. When they were alone, he approached her. "Let me come to you," he said, his voice gruff with desire. Tamar disguised her voice, making it higher, softer. "What will you give me if I let you?" "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," Judah promised. Tamar tilted her head. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "What pledge should I give you?" Judah asked. This was the moment Tamar had planned for. "Your seal and cord," she said, pointing to the cylinder seal he wore around his neck, the equivalent of his signature and identity. "And your staff, the carved walking stick that marked him as a tribal leader." Judah hesitated only briefly before removing the items. His seal, the cord that held it, and his staff, all symbols of his authority and identity. Without them, he was vulnerable. But his desire clouded his judgment. He handed them over, and Tamar accepted them, tucking them safely away. Then she led him off the main road to a small grove of trees where they wouldn't be seen. The encounter was brief. When it was over, Judah left without ever looking directly at her face, promising again to send the goat. Tamar waited until he was well out of sight before gathering her things and hurrying back to where she had hidden her widow's clothes. By sunset, she was back in her father's house, dressed once more in the garb of mourning, Judah's personal items hidden beneath her sleeping mat. When Judah's servant arrived the next day looking for the temple prostitute to deliver the promised goat, no one could direct him. There was no such woman in the area, the locals claimed. The servant returned to Judah empty-handed. "Let her keep the items," Judah said dismissively, though privately he was concerned about his missing seal and staff. "I sent the payment as promised. I don't want people laughing at me for searching everywhere for a prostitute." The matter, as far as he was concerned, was closed. 3 months passed. Tamar's body began to change. Her breasts swelled, her belly rounded. She was with child, Judah's child. But to everyone else, she was simply an unmarried widow who had shamed herself and her family. The news traveled quickly, as scandal always does. Soon it reached Judah's ears. "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot," his servants told him, "and now she is pregnant by harlotry." Judah's face darkened with rage. The law was clear. A widow who was promised to another son, but who had sex with someone else before that marriage took place, was guilty of adultery, and adultery carried a severe punishment. "Bring her out and let her be burned," Judah commanded. The men came for Tamar at dawn. She did not resist as they bound her hands and led her from her father's house. The crowd grew as they walked through the village, people eager to witness judgment, to see justice served on the woman who had broken their sacred laws. They brought her to Judah, who sat as judge at the village gate. His face was stone, his eyes cold. This was the man whose sons she had married, the man who had betrayed his promise to her, the man whose child now grew in her womb. "You have brought shame upon my family," Judah declared loudly for all to hear. "The penalty is death." Tamar stood straight, meeting his gaze without flinching. Then, from within the folds of her robe, she produced 3 items: a carved wooden staff, a cord, and a cylinder seal. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "Please examine them and tell me, whose are they?" Judah's face drained of color. His hands trembled as he recognized his possessions, the very symbols of his identity and authority that he had given to a veiled woman on the road to Timnah. The crowd murmured, realizing the implications. Judah, the accuser, was himself the father of Tamar's child. For a long moment, no one spoke. Judah stared at the items in Tamar's hands, then at her face, serene despite the ropes binding her wrists. He saw no triumph there, no smugness, only quiet determination. Finally, Judah spoke, his voice cracking with emotion. "She is more righteous than I," he admitted, loud enough for all to hear. "I did not keep my promise to give her to my son Shelah." With those words, everything changed. The ropes were cut from Tamar's wrists. The crowd that had gathered for an execution slowly dispersed, buzzing with this unexpected turn of events. Judah took Tamar back to his household, but he did not sleep with her again. This had never been about desire for either of them. For Tamar, it had been about justice, about claiming her rightful place and the children that had been denied her. For Judah, it had become a painful reminder of his failings as a father and as a man of honor. When the time came for Tamar to give birth, the midwives discovered she was carrying twins. This was both a blessing and a complication. Twins meant 2 heirs, but it also raised the critical question of which one would be the firstborn, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. As Tamar labored, one baby's hand emerged first. The midwife quickly tied a scarlet thread around the tiny wrist. "This one came out first," she declared. But then, to everyone's astonishment, the hand withdrew and the other twin emerged completely. "How did you break through first?" the midwife exclaimed, and so they named him Perez, which means breaking through. The second twin, with the scarlet thread still tied around his wrist, was named Zerah, meaning scarlet or brightness. 2 sons from one desperate act of courage, 2 sons to secure Tamar's future, 2 sons to carry on the family line. What no one could have known then was just how important that family line would prove to be. Years passed. Tamar's sons grew strong and healthy. Judah, humbled by the experience, became a more thoughtful, more honorable man. He treated Tamar with respect, ensuring she and her sons wanted for nothing. Then the rains stopped coming. 1 season, 2, the ground cracked, wells dried up, crops withered in the fields. Famine gripped the land, stretching from Canaan to Egypt and beyond. People began to starve. Families made desperate choices. News reached them that there was grain in Egypt. Somehow that nation had prepared for the famine. They had storehouses full of food, while the rest of the world starved. Judah and his brothers, the sons of Jacob, traveled to Egypt to buy grain, but what they found there was far more than food. The ruler who sold them grain was none other than Joseph, the brother they had sold into slavery decades earlier, the brother they had told their father was dead, the brother whose blood they had claimed was on a torn, blood-stained coat. Joseph had risen to become second only to Pharaoh himself, and now the brothers who had betrayed him were at his mercy. It was a reckoning long in coming. But Joseph, despite having every reason for revenge, chose mercy. He forgave his brothers. He brought the entire family, Jacob, all his sons, and their households to Egypt to survive the famine. And so Tamar, with her sons Perez and Zerah, journeyed to Egypt as part of Judah's household. The woman who had once been cast aside, forgotten, was now the mother of Judah's heirs, part of the family that would become the 12 tribes of Israel. Generations passed, the family of Jacob, now called Israel, grew from a handful of people to a mighty nation within Egypt. Then came slavery, suffering, and eventually Exodus. Moses led them out of bondage and back toward the promised land. Through it all, the descendants of Tamar and Judah, particularly through their son Perez, continued their line. Each generation added another link in a chain stretching across centuries. Salmon married Rahab, the harlot who had helped Joshua's spies in Jericho. Their son Boaz married Ruth, a foreign widow who, like Tamar before her, had taken destiny into her own hands. Their son Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse's youngest son was David, the shepherd boy who became king, the man after God's own heart. From David's line, centuries later would come Joseph, husband of Mary, and Mary would give birth to Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. In the official genealogy of Jesus, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, 5 women are mentioned, an unusual inclusion in what were typically male-only family records. Among them is Tamar, the forgotten widow who refused to be erased from history. This is why her story matters. This is why God chose her. In a world where women were property, where widows were forgotten, where the powerful made promises they never intended to keep, Tamar stood her ground. She fought not just for herself, but for her rightful place in a covenant that would eventually bring salvation to the world. She wasn't perfect. Her methods wouldn't have been approved by religious leaders, but God saw her heart, God saw her courage, and God used her scandalous history and all her parable power in His perfect plan.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be chosen by God? It doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean having an unblemished past or always making the right choices. Tamar was a woman who took desperate measures in desperate times. She tricked her father-in-law, she posed as a prostitute, she deliberately got pregnant outside of marriage, all acts that her society condemned. Yet when the moment of judgment came, it wasn't Tamar who stood condemned, it was Judah. She is more righteous than I, he admitted, because sometimes righteousness isn't about following rules, it's about seeking justice when justice has been denied. God chose Tamar not despite her complicated story, but because of it, her willingness to risk everything, her reputation, her safety, her very life, to claim what was rightfully hers, made her exactly the kind of person God uses to change the world. So many of us feel forgotten, overlooked, cast aside. We feel our lives don't matter in the grand scheme of things, that our struggles are invisible to God and to others. Tamar's story tells us something different. It tells us that God sees the forgotten ones, that He hears the cries of those who have been wronged, that He works through the most unlikely people, not the powerful, not the perfect, but the persistent, those who refuse to accept injustice, those who believe that promises should be kept. The next time you feel invisible or forgotten, remember Tamar. Remember how one woman's courage altered the course of history. Remember how God took what others meant for shame and turned it into a crucial link in humanity's salvation. This is Tamar's legacy, not just 2 sons born from deception, but a place in the lineage of the Messiah. Not just a scandalous story buried in the Old Testament, but a testimony to God's ability to work through our messy, complicated lives. God chose Tamar, and He chooses you too. Even when the world forgets, even when promises are broken, even when justice seems impossible. God remembers, God sees, God chooses. And like Tamar, your story isn't over yet.